Welcome to the 24th Annual Miami Jewish Film Festival, one of the world's largest and oldest Jewish cultural arts events. We want to thank all of our members, sponsors, community partners, volunteers, all of you film lovers, and especially our presenting sponsors, the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education, SAGE, and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation for all of their continued support throughout these years. My name is Rabbi Efrat Zeren Zohar. I'm the executive director of SAGE, and I'm so excited to be moderating a virtual conversation with actress Melissa Weisz, actor Luzer Twersky, and director Emily Cheeger from the movie Holy Woman, also known as Tzaddikus, which is premiering at this year's festival. Thank you all for joining us. We're really excited to have this conversation. So, this is one of the most enjoyable short films that I have seen I can't even tell you. And I watch these on a regular for the Miami Jewish Film Festival, among other things, and I was just enthralled. I found it hard to look away from the screen for a second. Y'all captured me both with the storytelling, the acting, the realism of it all was so clear to me, and then the provocative nature of the story itself. So I'm just going to dive right in, and I'm going to start with Emily and ask you to tell us a little bit about what prompted you to come up with this idea. What were you attempting to explore with this remarkable work?
Oh, that's a big question. So thank you, first of all, for having us. It's such an honor to be here. So let's see. There are a lot of different things that kind of led to the birth of this story and the world around Tzaddikus in general. A lot of it came through my personal experiences, living in Borough Park, trying in certain ways to assimilate myself into this kind of ultra-Orthodox framework as an outsider, having grown up not only secular, but also very kind of free and very exposed to a lot of different cultures, a lot of different philosophies, and as a very spiritual person myself, sort of being accustomed to being very free to establish my own ideas about the world and to have a great sort of level of integrity there, and then being confronted with what was essentially a fundamentalist framework that nevertheless had a lot of emotional meaning for me. And due to certain circumstances, I had to kind of grapple with that. And really the original impetus for it was this feeling that I would have when I would try to kind of express myself as a person within this framework in a way that I felt was in tune with my integrity, and feeling kind of like halacha and custom was like a box about this big, like that, and my head was like big and round like this, and I felt like I was trying to push my head through this little box and just never quite being good enough to justify myself within that framework and really trying hard. I think what Tzaddikus is about the push and pull between what we wish to be, what we are, and what others expect of us within certain frameworks. So there's the individual inspiration, individual conviction, individual identity versus dogma and custom and tradition and community and gender and all of these different things that we grapple with, that I think can be explored in a very interesting and deep way through the framework of this particular story. One thing that I like to tell people when I'm pitching my story set in the Hasidic community is that it is a great setting for drama because the stakes are so high. For every little decision you make day to day, like what order you put your shoes on, it just like from the smallest decision to the biggest one, you are held accountable for every little detail of how you live your life. And big stakes make for big drama. It's almost like making a film like that's set in the mafia world or something. It's like everything is life and death. So that is one thing that has always inspired me and kind of been a driving force for me to set stories in this world. And it's also been why I've felt a responsibility to know the world as well as I can as an outsider as I create these stories. So that's
Thank you. Thank you. That was very, there will be follow-up questions. Don't worry. So now I'm going to turn to our actors and ask you, clearly, I'm not telling, I don't think it takes brilliance to figure this out. You both grew up in this world, or at least something very similar, because your Yiddish is so spot on. Everything about your acting was just, the nuances were so remarkable. So you really felt immersed instantly. Whereas often when you're watching, sometimes people play actors, playing a part that's not really them, you see things that you're like, and it pops you right out. So I guess tell us a little bit about what it was like for you, who no longer live firmly in that world, to be kind of going back as actors into that world, trying to situate yourself into these characters. And what struggles did you personally have doing that, or maybe not? If there maybe there's no struggle whatsoever, but there must be kind of, I would think as an outsider, strange to be playing a part that you were at some point in time. Potentially now you're acting it, not being it. So whoever wants to begin.
Okay, I'll take it. I'll start. So there's definitely like a sense memory, right? Your body kind of knows. And so as I'm hearing you ask the question, what I'm thinking is, you know how you said that when it takes you out of it, when you see people are not really like natural in that. So for us, it's just acting, right? So you're acting the role. You don't have to deal with the Hasidic part because that's a sense memory. So I know this world, I know the nuance, and then you go into, I'm acting this character, I am being this character. So it just takes that extra element because this is a world I know. And then you just focus on the character in the moment. You have all the other actory things that like you prepping for this role. And, I grew up Hasidic, but this character is definitely not somebody I know personally. I had to get to know her. And then I got to know her and play that, right? And the relationship with Luzer's character. So that's where I feel like that's kind of my answer. I would have thought it was different, but as you're asking it, I'm like, that just took that part away. I know this world. And now how do I play in that world as my character? So it's kind of cool because you get to kind of be in it. There's like it feels familiar. It can also be emotional. But it's just fun. You get to play it, and you get to play a thing that I haven't been before. I haven't been this woman who then had a beard. You're like, that's wild, right? Like, there's so many things. So you get to kind of be just like playing a character, which is really fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because the interesting thing is that I've been doing this for a little bit now. And it's always, every time I've played a Hasidic Jew, it's always been different. It's always been a very different experience for me, because the characters have been different, because the film has been different, and the crew has been different, the vibe has been different, what the director wanted has been different. But I think there's always a certain familiarity, right? Where like I look at a character that isn't Hasidic necessarily. I'm not saying it's always the case, but sometimes, I can connect to them on a human level, but I wouldn't. I might not be able to say like, I get it. Oh yeah, I would think the same way, or like, I mean, there might be some points at which I do that because like otherwise I wouldn't be watching it, right? I wouldn't be relating to the character. But I think when it comes to Hasidic characters, there's something that that goes like, ah, yeah, I know that, yeah, I get that. And but it's different every time, because none of the people I've played before and the character in Sudeikis, like none of them are me, but they're all me. And the other part of that is also, I've been thinking about this like years ago when I first started watching movies and when I first got into acting, first got into movies. If I think back, I think one of my greatest motivators has always been that, and a lot of people are saying this now in terms of like Black representation and trans representation and all the other representations, and everybody wants a seat at the table. And I think part of it for us, I think for me personally, was that like, why is nobody making movies about us that even looks remotely relatable and real and proper? Mm-hmm. Like, why did I mean? Is there really nobody in the entire acting community that can chuckle properly? Like, that really doesn't exist. Is there nobody who knows how to do this? Does nobody know how to get animated on a completely, worthless conversation? I mean, why is it so hard to figure out as an actor? And the truth is, and the truth is that it's just something that's within you, and that's what drove me. Like, I want to see people like the people I grew up with on the screen. And I want them to speak properly and look properly. I don't have to like them, I don't have to agree with them. I don't have to agree with the film, but I want it. And I think ultimately that was one of my biggest motivators. So for me, the opportunity to do it is always like, absolutely, yes, more and more Hasidic movies and more great Hasidic movies like this one. And the more the merrier. Mm-hmm. That is not even remotely an answer to the question.
No, it was pretty good. It was pretty good. Okay. Don't worry, it was great. Yeah. And I guess I want to continue with the actors, and I'll go back to Emily in a moment. Obviously you can. I'm sure everyone's asking you, but if you would just tell us a little bit about where you're from, where you've lived, where you are now, and and what got you into acting. That a little kind of the trajectory in a way. And also, Melissa, if you would mention your podcast when or maybe we'll start with Melissa and we'll go to Luzer and then back to Emily. So
yeah, because Melissa, I don't remember. Yeah, because I don't remember anything that happened before February 2020.
I'll help you remember. I'll give you some hints about your life.
Okay. He's a good friend.
Okay. So I grew up in Borough Park in Brooklyn, in Hasidic community. In a Hasidic community, I grew up in Satmar, so that's the sect I'm from. And so I went to an all-girls school. And we have all the clothing rules, all the tznius rules. I have a very large family, which is common. Mine is actually not that large, I think, considering some other people's. But I have like 6 sisters, 2 brothers, like 50 nephews. See, meh. And like I'm a great aunt, right? So it's like a large family. And then, should we talk about like the leaving of it? Is that something you want to hear? You think your listeners want to know? Okay, so So for me, my general, like, the community is great at feeling like if you're a part of the community, there's a safety. Like my childhood memories are all about, I felt very safe, very loved, very taken care of. There was just this communal aspect that's beautiful. I think that, like, understanding that me as an individual, I had to figure out who that was. And I felt like I couldn't be part of a community that I had trouble figuring that out while I was there. So for me, a lot of that struggle was asking questions, trying to understand myself. For me, it was a lot of gender expression. It was a lot of my gender was just like, this is what a woman does, this is what a man does. And I didn't work for me. And so for me, that was a lot of my questions. And so I did go through an arranged marriage. And then when I had left, it didn't occur to me to act because it's not something I thought of, right? So I studied psychology and I was like, putting myself through school. It wasn't something that I thought would happen. But then I had friends of mine who were working on Romeo and Juliet in Yiddish, which I believe screened at Miami at your film festival years ago. And they were working on it and they invited me to audition for Juliet. And I hadn't ever read Shakespeare, I put myself through school, so I knew about Shakespeare, but I didn't. And so like, I remember the first time I got that script, I was just like, how do I read? I was so nervous and anxious about it. I didn't know what this was, but she liked me for some reason. And then I got to play Juliet. And that was my first thing with acting. And I kind of hated it as I was doing it. And then it felt like it was so, right? Because it was first day, green screen. I'm like drinking the poison, killing myself, first day. And I'm just like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I remember just like crying. I wasn't comfortable and I wanted to compose myself. I wasn't comfortable being like, vulnerable. I didn't know what acting was. And then I remember feeling so exposed and raw. And I was just like, really hated it. And then that cathartic feeling came in. And then when we went to film festivals and then the way it connected to people, I'm like, this is what I want to do. So that's kind of how mine started. I got to do it. And then I studied and then I got to do it more. And now like Luzer had shared before, I also will take anything that has Hasidic characters that's a good script, that is not a mockery. Because sometimes, unfortunately, it's presented, you get presented a script and you look at it and you think, how are you showing me this? Do you not realize how cartoonish or how disrespectful or because sometimes it's literally people are trying to, and they're outsiders looking in, which is why I appreciate Emily's script so much. And Emily as a person so much had done, and a director and writer, Emily like presented the script and we were just like, clearly this person knows about this world, clearly has done research, clearly is respectful, clearly is open to like talking about it. Like it felt like, okay, now we can go to work, right? Like this is all taken care of. Now let's get to work. So I will also take characters or take on roles that are Hasidic people as much as, and I write as we wrote a play with my friend Malky Goldman, which was, canceled because of COVID. So we don't know when it'll be up, but it's called the Freien, which is the women, and we'll see when it'll come back up. So that's the work I do. I also will take any other acting roles. If there's directors or people listening, if there's a role that feels right, please reach out always. But I have done a lot of Hasidic roles and I will do it because I think it's important. And I think just like the authenticity, there's so much beauty and so much things everybody can relate to. I feel like, they're universal issues, universal themes. And in that world is just dramatic and it's overt, but everybody can see themselves, I think, when you show the humanity of it. So to me, that's the beauty, right? And so like my life's work is to normalize otherness. And I do that as well, which I shared with you before, but I do that with my podcast as well, which is called The Forbidden Apple. It's the Forbidden Apple podcast. It's available on all streaming platforms. And we talk about the relationship between queer people and religion. And we have people from all different backgrounds, people that grew up religious or have found their own way in life, people that became religious, people that are spiritual, have alternative ways of religion. And it's all about reclaiming your spirituality. And our new season that we're preparing right now is actually The Forbidden Apple is going to Africa. And we're interviewing queer people from different countries in Africa. And so that's like my life's work in general, is to like give voice. And with film, like to be able to do this film and give voice to that as the actor, it's a beautiful thing. So I'm really happy I got to do this. It was a very long-winded question, so.
Beautiful. And we'll come back to that notion of voice, because that was such a prominent theme in this movie, of course. Mm-hmm. So Luzer, you're up next. So I'll just repeat in case you forgot. Tell us a little about where you're from, where you've lived, where you're now, how you got into acting.
Oh, yeah. So where I'm from, well, I grew up in Borough Park also as well. Actually, I grew up a couple of blocks from Melissa, not far from her. I was in a different sect. We were more involved in bells and other kind of like unaffiliated versions of Hasidism. And I left when I was 22-ish. Yeah, 22. God, that's a long time ago. Anyway, so I've always been a performer. I've always loved performing. I'm an attention seeker. It's just who I am. It's a blessing and a curse, mostly a curse. And when I found this thing called movies, and I realized that people, can do this for a living, and they can make, They can make a living doing this, and it's a thing that people do. Most of them not very successfully. I was like, yeah, well, then I guess I'll do that too. I mean, most of them not very successful, including myself, most of the time. But you know, I don't want to sound like I'm, you know, kind of like dismissing other people's effort, because I don't work most of the time either. But anyway, that was just that was just the Jew thing. That was like 15 seconds of just Jew. So you can edit that and post. Anyway, so
Oh,
yeah,
funny.
so I decided. What's that?
Just watching you riff. It's funny.
Yeah, okay. Anyway,
It's
so moving on. So yeah, so I started doing that. I started pursuing that like immediately after I left, and started doing like extras work and basically anything I can get my hands on. And kind of like slowly and surely, I got a little bit of a you know, a toe in every once in a while. But I kind of like to expand on what Melissa was saying about like a representation and Hasidim in film in general. And I mean, I very much agree with that. And I was saying in a previous panel about like what makes me decide to take a role. You know, it's got to be one of two things. Hopefully both. Hopefully it has both elements, but it's got to have at least one of those elements. It's got to pay me a lot of money, or it's got to be a really good script. So you know, it's always better when it has both. But you know, you like, I mean, Melissa can attest to that. You know, the people who have been involved in like in portraying Hasidim over the last 10 years, which is a handful of people, it's very rare that something gets made or produced that it doesn't in one way or another cross, you know, my email inbox. And for the most part, I just, you know, toss them away. I recently had a run-in with something that came to me, and they asked me, like, you know, send me a script and read it, and I wrote back saying, reading this makes me wish I never learned English. So that's, I mean, to be honest, that is.
I'm sorry. I just that I'm sorry.
No, but
That's so great.
but yeah, like,
Yeah,
it's
a great
kind of
put
like
down.
what Melissa.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what Melissa says.
Yeah.
Just like, what?
That's a classic comeback from you.
Well, no, it's because
there is though like sometimes it's caricatures of human beings, and it's
not just
setting.
that. You know, it's like Melissa said, like you read something and you're like, this person knows nothing and they don't care to know. Okay, this is someone.
True, by the way, I just want to interject because
Yeah.
you know, actors have spoken about it. Like, it was so important to me that I create a world that was true to the world, even if it was in some ways a fantastical story.
Exactly.
I did the work of getting to know the community as well as I could. I did the work of forming close bonds with people in the community, and I'd be damned if I'd make a film that didn't resonate after all that work I put in. So,
yeah,
you know, the casting was very deliberate.
Mm-hmm.
Every aspect of the film was very deliberate in that way. So I just want to.
It really showed.
Yeah.
And
you know,
that's why Luzer took this movie. That's exactly what you said.
You
if
know,
it wasn't going to be a lot of money, it was going to be a really darn good script that was not a caricature, right?
Yeah, and you know what? And the funny thing about show business is that these two things kind of don't go together, right? Because like the more people watch it, the more well, the less relevant accuracy becomes, right? Because the more people watch it, the more there's a chance that fewer of them know what they're even watching, right? So like if you take something that goes global in a way, you know, like 99% of the people watching it aren't gonna be able to tell, and the fact is that the studio, you know, that is the only metric by which they care at all. You know, like how many people are going to watch it. You know, they don't care how accurate it is, because if it's really accurate and it's not appetizing to the masses, then they're not going to do it. So, you know, of course, the trick is always to find that balance, and I think that and that's what matters. And with Emily, it was clear that we know why, but like it was clear she understood the environment, and she cared to tell a story that's different and interesting and rich. And I'm very proud of having done it.
Yeah. And yes, exactly. And that's, I think, what I, I guess I found it so surprising because it was so unique that I have become used to the caricatures. And as a result, when you see something that's truly authentic, that really is inhabiting people who who could really be real, and the way that they're being brought to life is in this very respectful an interesting way. That I think it showed up very, very strongly in the film. So Emily, I want to turn to you now and just sort of ask you a little bit about the process that you went through. You know, from the idea, which is so interesting to pick that particular idea. Like, where did that come from? And I imagine the theme of the voice, right? The voice of women, which is, just for our readers, in case you're, or our listeners, in case you're not familiar, there's a phrase in halachic literature and Jewish tradition called kol isha, the voice of a woman. And the voice of a woman is perceived in certain circumstances to be, seductive. It needs to be something that's much more kept internal. Often, you wouldn't sing in public unless there's only women around. The voice of a woman is something that's very much moderated by the community and its traditions. And so, and it becomes part of the whole conversation of, well, can you have a female rabbi? Can you have a female cantor? And it's all wrapped up with this notion of kol isha, how much a woman's voice can be public. How much can it be authoritative? What does it say about a community if a woman is a leader? Does that say all the men are idiots? And that was, it's certainly in the past a concern. Today, obviously, we're living in a very different time period, but the notion of kol isha still is that notion. So from idea, right? You have this idea, and we just saw the movie, and what happens when a woman's voice is overtaken, right? And she becomes, in a sense, taken over by a man. And then how everyone responds to this in that world, in this kind of gender dysphoria experience that everybody's having in the entire circle of the actors of this movie as they encounter this and don't know what to do. So the idea, to the writing, to getting the funding, to the casting, to the shooting, like there's a lot there. And of course, that's another really big question, but maybe you can to give us the cliff notes, as they say, of that, but so fascinating. So start with the idea. Where did that come from, and how did it occur to you? How did you transform it into a great dramatic story?
Okay, well, I mean, again, a lot of it came from my personal experiences in one way or another, and the issues that I had to grapple with through contending with halacha as a creative person, trying to, in some ways, fit in. The idea for the film actually came from a dream, which they often do, and often my films will come from a single image that will then kind of lead me to unearth the story behind the image. And somewhat counterintuitively, in the case of Tzedekis, that image was the final image of Shia with half of his beard fallen off, which was a nightmare I had about my fiance at the time. And it became like this metaphor in some ways for a failure to live up to standards that one was being held up to. But I think even more important in this context is also the fact that I am a musician and I am a singer in addition to being a filmmaker. And for me, my voice has been the best thing I have to offer this world. And one thing that I had to grapple with when contending with Orthodox halacha was that so many of the things that up until that moment had been to me the most precious things I had to offer the world were being called into question because of being a woman, because of being in an Orthodox framework that in essence asks you to outsource your moral compass. And this was something that it was such a demon I wrestled with for so long. And in some ways, a lot of that struggle became embodied into this idea of Kol Isha Be'erva, and this idea that which is the very essence of your self-expression, your truth, your emotion, what you have to give to the world is unseemly, is not fit to be seen by anyone except yourself, or not fit to be heard, that it's somehow something to be afraid of or ashamed of. And so I found that this concept of the female voice was a great vehicle to explore some of these very fundamental questions that I wanted to explore, and the challenges I had towards some of the framework that I was up against. So that's really what it came from. Of course, you know, the idea of Kol Isha also comes into the questions that are currently being grappled with in Orthodoxy, with the advent of women wishing to be rabbis within an Orthodox context. You know, I have friends who have been through the Maharat training. There's a whole question around whether they can, in fact, be Rabbanim, or if they can be, you know, called something else. And a lot of that actually hinges simply on the halachic status of a female voice. So it's just a very interesting, complex set of questions that it raises, and it worked for me. And again, like, I had spent years exploring this world in a kind of hyper realistic way. I would talk to my friends about, you know, their most private fears, their experiences, the worst things they'd have ever experienced, the best things. And I cared about these people so much, and I wanted to write a truthful story that would resonate with them. And then once I'd written that feature script, which is called Dancing at Two Weddings, which is when I first reached out to Luzer and Melissa, was when I was writing that. Once I finished that process, I realized, wait, I can also explore my own truth through this setting. Now that I feel comfortable enough in it, that I can go into what is, in essence, my inner truth of, you know, my dreamscape, my hopes, my fears, my aspirations, my disappointments. I can explore all of that and bring a personal note to this, and not only tell someone else's story. So in essence, it was a marriage of sorts of me wanting to give back to this community, and also wanting to participate on an emotional level, and to bring my story through someone else's story into this shared kind of context of this kind of Hasidic landscape reimagined through my dreamscape.
Interesting. I wonder, like, Rabbi, I was wondering, like, isn't that, you know, because Emily was talking about you know, the women, the Maharat thing. Isn't it? It feels like deja vu, like the Jewish kind of, like, we have like there's like a cycle that we go through. Like, you know, before the Holocaust, there was all this modernism, and there was all the backlash against the modernism and the reform movement, you know, and then everything went to shit. But it's kind of like right now, like we're having like it's the beginning. We're starting, like, we're seeing like the beginning of this kind of like of the modern Jews going up against, like, okay, you guys are just like backwards, you know, and like, you know, that we don't do that anymore in the 21st century. Let's join the thing. Isn't that kind of like a cycle that the Jews go through every like 100, 200 years?
Well, there's for sure there's cycles. There are definitely cycles that rise and fall.
I know you were supposed to be asking me questions, but whatever.
I know, right.
Yeah.
But, and so there definitely are cycles. What's fascinating, and what I haven't seen a lot written on or even done through other expressive medium, is that in Israel, there's more acceptance, and there's a greater number of women who are doing really innovative things within the Orthodox world, be it modern Orthodox or even more centrist Orthodox, where you have the Toenets who go up in the court, you know, the divorce courts to represent women. You have women who are empowered to give answers on Nida at this point, right? But if you can give an answer on Nida, meaning you can be a halachic decisor on Nida, you can be a halachic decisor on anything because it's all a matter of just whatever knowledge you have. So that's already a little window that's opening, and granted it's in this very little niche-y narrow field. And then you have the Maharats, as was mentioned before, these women who have this kind of title that isn't quite rabbi, but is a spiritual leader, and they're treated as spiritual leaders mostly in modern Orthodox congregations. But there's this, in the United States, it seems like people are so much more afraid of this, and it's so much more a controversial element than it actually seems to be in Israel, which is like, why exactly is that? Is that the diaspora Jewish identity is much more fraught than an Israeli Jewish identity, which is maybe more solid because you're living in this majority culture? You know, and is it that reform is so tiny? Look, think about it. Liberal Judaism is tiny and niche, more or less, it feels like, more in Israel versus here, where it's it's the largest part of Judaism here. And so Orthodoxy feels much more of the minority here and has to differentiate. We're not them. What's your theory, Luzer?
Well, my theory is that the biggest difference in Israel is the idea of power, right? Because like in Israel, there is a government that is a Jewish government, which means that, like, if you organize, you can actually gain power over people's lives in a meaningful way, and you can change Judaism on a whole if you actually get that. In America, that doesn't exist. So you have the power thing is more an internal issue. It's not real power. It's like great, you're the most famous guy in Borough Park. Woohoo! You know.
Well, and there's very little, like, in a certain sense. In America, right? If you want a get, the rabbi here will do anything to get you that get because they know you can just say to heck with it. I don't want to put up with this garbage.
Yeah.
So in Israel, where it's the force of law, right? There's not necessarily the need to be as accommodating, right? Because it's that, confluence of law and religion in personal status issues in Israel that makes for such a difference. And maybe you're right. Maybe it's the fact that Orthodoxy actually has power in Israel that enables it to take that deep, expansive breath and go, well, we can allow for that. Well, I mean, maybe we don't like it, but we don't have to stone it either. We don't have to excommunicate it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's not just that they have power. There's the idea of the potential of what that power is, the potential of power. Mm-hmm. It's like, like, I think the women in Israel, for example, like if you had someone like Ruchi, what's her name? Ruchi Fryer. If you had someone like Ruchi Fryer in Israel, she would have a much stronger case to make, and it would be easier for her. But but I didn't go to high school, so what do I know?
I do think that Jews in general, like you're asking, you also asked if it's like a continuous, like a cyclical thing. I think that in general, as human beings and as Jews, we go through these cycles specifically, and people stand up, and then there's a resistance to it, and then people get more extreme, and then there's the resistance. And it just seems to be like, I'm reading, and I know this is a Jewish thing, so maybe I shouldn't say it, but I'm reading the New Testament for the first time with a priest, a lesbian priest. And that's part of my research for my podcast. So I'm reading the New Testament, and actually it's the Jewish annotated Testament. So it's written by Jewish scholars. And what's fascinating to me, I'm trying to figure out, like, based on the Jewish history that I was taught, and like where does it fit in? And that gives me clarity. They're like, oh, that's referencing Shavuos, that's referencing that, Jesus was Jewish. And you know what the most interesting thing is when I read it, I think I recognize the voice. I'm reading, like, currently I read Mark, and I'm reading that thinking OTD people sound the same way, people that have left the Hasidic community. And that's what's interesting, because I'm working with a priest and we're talking about it, and it's part of her whole thing is, so then I'm thinking Jesus was Jewish, and when he criticized, it's coming from that perspective of knowing. It's not like, because she talks about how, like, a lot of the scriptures and some of the stuff that's given over can lead to anti-Semitism. So that's kind of what we're trying to, like, work on together. And so it's interesting to see, because when I'm reading it, I'm like seeing it as somebody that has left and is criticizing and saying, I don't like how that's done. Let's do it differently. Whatever you think of Jesus, I'm not a follower of Jesus, but and so that's what's interesting. I think that, like, people consistently try to make change within. They're like,
Mhm.
I know how to do it better. I don't like it, right? And coming from my
Mhm.
point of view as a woman within the community, I didn't like some of it. I'm very close to my family and I see a lot of beauty, but yet I have my issues. Luzer has other issues. Emily coming into that community, but being Jewish patrilinically and seeing that you know, how that's responded to and going through all that. Like we all have our own shit of like, it could be better. It should be better. And maybe I can make it better by my work, by me expressing it, by me talking to people, me getting people to open up. I feel like it's such a, for me, it's such a like, when I'm reading these stories, it's such a like human thing, and it's definitely a Jewish thing. Like,
Yeah. And also there's nothing more frustrating, I think, for people and more, I think, threatening than the person from within who's criticizing.
yes.
That's so much more painful than the one from outside. Oh, I don't have to care about you. I don't have to think about you. But you that's next to me that knows the sources,
Yeah.
that grew up in this world, and you've decided things are going to be different. Whoa, we have to,
Yeah.
it hurts much more. It's much more painful and personal, which was why, as you're reading the New Testament, you're seeing that clash, but also, also anything. That's why we're, there's nothing, if you hear a conservative Jew rat on Reform Judaism, it's as if
Yes.
it's the worst thing in the whole world when,
Yeah.
if you're 100 feet away in Haredi Judaism, you're like, what? Like, what are they talking about? These little narrow differences, right? And it's
Yeah.
the same thing vice versa,
Yeah.
that's humans. But
Yeah.
we don't want to go too, so
Yes, sorry. Okay.
I want to go back into the movie a little bit more, and I want to look at this notion because it was so fascinating, and there was a bit of mysticism here that I'm not sure everybody watching the movie would have gotten. The Shirayim. Emily, tell us about the Shirayim. Can you give us a little bit more about what is this custom? The fish on the plate? Like, I'm not sure everyone's going to get what happens, and then suddenly there's this transmigration of souls happening with this Shirayim, and like, tell us more.
Well,
First of all, what is Shirayim? Just help people understand what this is and what this custom is a little bit more, and
I think Luzer would actually be the better person to explain the concept of Shrayim, but Shrayim actually is not a unique concept to Hasidic Judaism. It's something you also see in Hinduism with gurus and disciples, where when you partake of food that has been either sacrificed to God or that has been eaten of by your guru, part of their spiritual essence is passed on to the person partaking of it. So for me, it was just an instinctive vehicle for this kind of spiritual transmigration of like the essence of one to the other. And it was like the bridge between these two characters in a way, because, when you go into an Orthodox shul, and especially a Hasidic shul, there is the mechitza and the women are behind it. And yet you'll still see that at a tish, they will bring over some food to the women's side. So that's kind of like a bridge that connects the two. And I would go into a shul on Friday nights and I would watch, a tish from behind the mechitza. And by the way, some people might notice in the film, there are only two women behind the mechitza and all the men. That isn't always the case, but certainly in the shul that I would go to, that was the case. I would often be the only woman there. And so in a way, the food became like this natural way to kind of create that flow of energy. And I do think that is a somewhat universal concept. It's not unique to Hasidic Judaism. And I did want to make a film that would resonate with a whole gamut of different audiences. And I felt like this symbol was universal enough that even if people didn't necessarily know about the custom of Shrayim, they would kind of get a gut feeling about it that would allow them to understand the spiritual significance.
And thank you. That was very helpful. And I didn't know that about Hinduism. So that is really interesting. These world, the Jungian right? Ideas that kind of float from culture to culture, whether they're actually intertwined and know one another or they don't. They just are human. And I guess I wanted to also ask a little bit about the concept of the family. It's, you know, they really believed, these guys, right, all these different ages of the family, the men in this family, who recognized their father in this woman. You know, they say, you know, they hear the voice and they know it's him, right? And they want to hear, like, they want to hear from their father. Like, you know, think about it. Any one of us who may have lost someone that we've loved, you know, what would you give to hear just a moment, you know, something that would say, oh, you're here, you're really back on earth with us, oh my gosh, you know, in whatever form. You'd be so delighted. And yet they couldn't find themselves able, given the fact that this was a female body, to just, like, there was certain, like, you know, asking a halacha question was one thing, but like letting someone lead services in a female body was just, that I can't handle that, you know, even knowing that was him, right? So that I wanted you to respond to a little bit as well.
Okay, just to clarify, they are not all literally his children, they're his Hasidim. The one person who's actually his son is Reb Moshe, who succeeds him as the Rebbe. And they go through with the question about whether or not they can remove the beard. So let's see. So about what, can you just reword the question again?
Just the notion of, yeah, it was kind of more of extemporaneous. It was just the notion that in one segment, they're looking to, they really believe this might be the voice. And I also found all the halachic questions on the street going towards the house were really fascinating, very insider-ish, but spot on. And then, you know, even recognizing that this might be the father, the Rebbe, their Rebbe, when she gets up to lead, or when the Rebbe gets up in a female body to lead services, that was beyond the pale. And I'm wondering what the thinking was of, like, you know, there's this incremental pieces of the story. You're just like, you're sort of pushing the boundary, this, and then pushing a little more, and then pushing a little more, you know, that's the way it felt.
Yeah, I mean, the essence of the story is very much about boundaries and questions about boundaries. And I didn't want to give answers so much as I wanted to ask questions. Because, you know, a lot of Talmudic discourse is about defining boundaries and defining increments and measurements, and, you know, it's really, you know, I guess it could have gone either way. And if I were to write a feature with this story, I would probably explore these questions even further. For this particular iteration of the story, I wanted there to be a certain point where she would kind of step into her power as the embodiment of the Rebbe and kind of figure out where the boundaries were with the rest of the community. Because the community is already kind of pushing against its own boundaries of propriety by even sitting down with this woman and looking at her and saying, we want to hear his voice through you. So you're already playing with these boundaries in a way that's questionable. But it just felt like there needed to be a kind of natural culmination point for that. I had something else I wanted to say about that. Yes, so I think it's important to note that in writing the script and in making the story, I was very deliberate about what boundaries I was willing to cross and what boundaries I was not, because I wanted this film to be something that people, even in an Orthodox context, could watch and find meaningful and not just be offended by or turned off by and just be like, oh, I want nothing to do with this. But I think also for me, the question of how do I ask these questions in a way that can be both provocative and meaningful, and yet accessible and relatable to people who are committed to these rules? I think that's an interesting question for me as an artist, and one that you don't often really, it's like a tightrope that you don't see people often willing to walk. Like, you can watch a documentary like One of Us, where you see people in very difficult and traumatic situations, and there's a very clear side taken. And even if I myself have strong opinions about certain things that go on in the community, things I don't agree with, or things that I feel protective about, or whatever, I want to create a relationship with, and I have a responsibility to that community, and I take it seriously. I have a responsibility towards my actors. I have a responsibility towards the people who gave us their homes or their shuls to shoot in. I have a responsibility to my audience and the outside world, and I do what I can to honor that in my work.
Yeah, and it really shows. And am I right in that this was your this film was made as the culmination of your graduate studies?
Yes, that's correct.
Tell us a little more. What?
So yeah, I graduated from the NYU graduate film program in 2018. And after my initial year, which was way back in like 2008, I was away for a while. I was touring the world as a musician. And then I came back in 2013, and within the first month or so, I had this very kind of soul shattering experience in which I became aware of the underbelly of the Hasidic community and just how many people felt trapped and unable to express themselves, or who were like unable to relate to the outside world in any kind of natural sense, of like from a place of mutual understanding. And I knew that if I engaged with this experience fully and allowed it to kind of actually have the effect on me that the initial kind of shock was, I knew that it would make me grow tremendously as an artist, and that I would learn something about myself, and it would just open up a whole new kind of dimension in my life, and it did. So it was very, very scary to realize how deeply this realization kind of touched me. Like it just like poked at some wound that I had, where I was like, my God, like I need to understand what is going on. I need to understand these people. I care about them. And there was just something that just drew me like a magnet to it. And I just obsessed over it for years, which was necessary in order to do what I do. It was necessary to obsess over it. It was necessary to have this drive to understand and to interact and to give back. And so, I wrote stories, I wrote scenes, I wrote this, feature screenplay, and everyone in my class thought pretty much that I was crazy because of the preoccupation. But, obsession is my superpower, and that's how I fuel my work. And so, lo and behold, I write this screenplay, and a couple of years later, you have Unorthodox screening on Netflix, which is pretty much what I'd been trying to do for those 5 years, and it has half of my cast in it that I'd shot the film a year earlier. So, I must not be completely crazy to think that there is something truly, valuable and interesting in exploring these stories and exploring humanity through this particular lens.
Beautiful.
So.
Beautiful. Thanks. And I'm going to turn back to Luzer and Melissa for final things, but thank you for thank you. Thank you for your obsession. And I'm looking forward to seeing more of it in the future, whatever it is, whatever the new obsession is, or the same obsession, because it was really, really superb. So Luzer, at the end of the movie, it seems like your wife's soul has migrated to you, and you're now waking up in a new way. If you could extrapolate or write whatever you would want the rest of the movie after the cut was, what would it be? Tell us what you think happens at the end.
I would never attempt to do that. And I'll tell you a little story. I made a movie a couple of years ago that was also on the Miami Jewish Film Festival. And at that particular festival, it's a movie called Felix and Mira, and Melissa was in that movie as well. And at your film festival, someone asked the question, asked the director, Maxime Giroux, what happened to Felix and Mira? Mm-hmm. And he just stood there on the stage and looked the audience member straight in the eye and said, I have no idea. The movie ended. So
there we go. It's all up to us.
It's for the second thing I wouldn't attempt also because like, you know, that's Emily's job. Emily might have the answer to that question. And also it is a funny thing as an actor. It's not my job to always understand what the director is trying to do, because I don't always understand. Sometimes I say yes to projects and I have no idea what I'm saying yes to. I just get a feeling that this is interesting and I can tell that the person I'm working with is someone I want to work with. And it's funny, like a lot of, you know, the movie is a very spiritual movie and it's a very, you know, it's got a lot of these metaphysical stuff in it. And I am not that kind of person. I'm not into that stuff. I'm philosophical, but I'm not into like trying to understand those things. So like when I read something like this, like with Sudeikis, I'm like, listen, I don't get it, but this is interesting. I've never done anything like this before. I love the way she writes. I love what she's trying to do, and I'm not exactly sure what she's trying to do, but I like what she's trying to do, and because I like it, I want to be part of it. So I'm the wrong person to ask, because a lot of these things I almost look at them. I look at the whole story, but I also look at them at scene by scene, because that's the way we shoot it, and that's the way you have to, I guess, practice the thing that we're doing, is we do it scene by scene, and what is that person going through in that particular scene. Of course, considering what happened in the previous scene and what's going to happen in the scene after that. But because nothing happens after that scene, I wasn't even inclined to think about it.
And on that note,
yeah.
Melissa, so you can answer that question, or you could answer a different question in case you didn't have any thoughts after, you know, your character had passed on, so you're done. And but either that one, or why you personally maybe felt that this was an important story to tell from your point of view. What was important about it to tell? So we'll give you the closing. Oh, sure.
I just want to add one thing, because the other part of it is also like, because I realized that made me sound like I don't know, like dismissive or something. But I want to say, like, the other part of the job to me is just listening to the director. So like, I don't need to know everything. I don't have to understand everything. I have to trust the director that she knows what she's doing, and whatever she tells me to do, just do it, because especially when it's something that like is not my wheelhouse, like metaphysical stuff. It's not my wheelhouse. She knows what she wants. She knows what she's doing. I'm just going to do what she says. Anyway, sorry, I apologize. Go on.
No, it's very interesting, and actually connects back to Emily, who mentioned earlier how being in the Orthodox world, in the Hasidic world, in a certain sense, was difficult because you're outsourcing your decision making in many ways to, you know, not your own personal decision making, but the authoritative, what you should or shouldn't do. The ultimate way of doing things is, in a sense, you know, in the way the director interacts with actors, right? Or the writer director potentially, right? Who knows? This is your thing. You are in command, right? And your actors are people who don't know quite as much as you, because you were the creator of it all. You created the entire thing. And in some ways, right, the Rabbanim are the people on earth that are the representatives of the Borei Olam, the creator of the world, right? And they're the ones who are, in a sense, saying to all of the actors, you know, the average people in the room, you know, this is the way it is. This is my ruling. This is what it should be. And you're communicating. It's very interesting. It just hit me that what you had said earlier is, in some sense, what Luzer is describing as the director, writer, actor relationship.
If I can just interject really quickly before passing the mic on.
Sorry, Melissa.
Sorry, Melissa. One thing I actually really wanted to add to something I said earlier was that the voice of the rabbi or the Rebbe is also in essence a metaphor for how I felt grappling with halacha, in the sense that at some point I remember feeling like my body is no longer my own, my voice is no longer my own, my thoughts are no longer my own, my time is no longer my own. It's all something that I have to sacrifice to some higher authority, be that the Rabbanim or Hashem. It's like, or the concept of Hashem as it exists in Orthodoxy. So that is actually a very big point of why I use the voice, because it takes over the body. The beard takes over the body. It's literally no longer her body or her voice that is speaking through her or manifesting itself. So there's that. And also I just want to point out that even, like, I'm not sure that it's like the most kind of like, I'm not sure the question of what happens after is the question to ask about the story, because if it were to be a longer story, I would probably have like run with the concept of the woman and the beard, you know, and gone somewhere very wild with that. And I might yet do that. I might write a feature, and, you know, again,
take note, like, out there, nobody steal this idea. She's got it.
No, like the question, you know, like what if someone put Havdalah wine in the mikveh? It wouldn't be so much fun if it were your wife. So what if it were someone else's wife as well? What if, you know, it turns into like a, you know, a bit of a pandemic, as they say. I mean, yeah, sort of.
Okay, that one I had never heard before, so I just I intuited it. But
you give the end of the challah, you know, to the woman, so because they'll forget Talmud or something if they eat it, you know, so you give it to the women because it doesn't matter. It's kind of similar. It's like one of these weird superstitions that exist. Anyway, Melissa, sorry for taking a bit of time.
So. Yeah, I think I think all this stuff is important, because, and it also gives me time to like be like, oh, all these points, I love it. Okay, so I think my thing is definitely I did not, like, Emily's brain is a lot more fantastical and mystical than like the way I generally think, or did at that time, because I'm like, you know, I have my own journey of like my spirituality and how that looks like now. But as I was reading the script, I did not understand that part. I really liked it though. But I remember being, after we shot, being like, I wonder how this film is, it can either be like crazy, or it's like, in either way, it's going to be either amazing or like, I don't know where she's going. And when I saw it, I'm like, ah, yes, of course. Like, it's amazing, right? But it was kind of like, I knew, like, I can see, like, it's brilliant. I can see Emily's brilliant, and like I like the scenes, like Luzer was saying, like I liked the story. It was authentic in that way. And then it was creative, and how all these things that I think would make it a fantastic movie, but also it was so wild to me. I'm like, I don't know what this is going to be. What does this mean? How does it look? What is it? Like, the whole thing was just very wild. So also just following, like, continue, like on what Luzer was saying, just following Emily's lead was definitely just like trying to, you know, just bring myself as much as I could to what that vision was. And then seeing that, the whole picture. So I had to kind of also just like let go and be like, I don't fully get it. I wish and I hope and I think it's going to be amazing. Like, I can see it being amazing, but also like, I have to wait to see. And I'm really happy with how it came out. I think it's fantastic. So definitely in that part, there was letting go. But what I really liked was how she was playing with those themes, how the script was playing with all of it and questioning all of it, and like turning. I like the concept, because for me, this gender thing is something that's like, you know, means a lot to me, and it's something that I'm fascinated with, and it affects me personally, and I wonder how people deal with it in different ways in different places. Because when I first left my community, I'm like, okay, I can be whoever I am, and then I come out in the world and I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, this is everywhere. It's just more overt. People are like, oh, these people are crazy. But then you come out in the world, you're like, you're doing the same thing. And all these, like, to me, it was overt, but it's like less overt than the community. But it's all the same stuff. It's all this gender divide and this genderized world and women and men. And I couldn't believe, and style, everything is like, you know, society is we're still so trapped in that box. So I was shocked. I remember the first time I walked out, like, and I think I was wearing pants for the first time, and I saw two women that kind of had the same clothing on. And I was like, why are you doing that? Choose your own clothes. Like you get to now. Like, what are you doing? You know? So like for me, seeing that the boxes that people have, I think I went off on a little tangent. But what I really like
that they have, they don't even know.
They don't
That's
even
the interesting
know.
thing. They don't even know because they're in the box as much as anybody else is in the box. It's the people who've left their box that are looking around going, wait a minute, you're all still in boxes.
You're all still in boxes.
Well, I think we're all, I think all we're doing, honestly, and this is my philosophical
from
side.
one box to the next.
No, I think all we're doing is we're just switching boxes. That's all.
Yeah.
You know, like it's not like like we're all moving to China or or Uruguay or anything. You know, we're just moving from like that box to the American box to the liberal box to the conservative box to the whatever other box. We're just moving around boxes. You know.
There's another point here too, though, which is, I'll try to just make it quickly, is that one thing that I've noticed in my, interacting with the ex-Hasidic communities a lot is that one of the first kind of culture shocks that the people I know have left, and that is it kind of sticks out when you get to know people who've recently left, is that your understanding of the outside free world is often very it takes a while for you to calibrate your understanding of boundaries in the outside world, because like you're so used to having everything, like all the rules are so clearly laid out, and it's very kind of black and white. This is right, this is not, and if you don't adhere to this, well, then you must be completely depraved, for instance. So then it takes a long time to figure out the nuances of those outside world boxes and how they work, and how it's not necessarily all black and white. It can be in boxes that are gray, and it's just like bigger boxes.
But those are my favorite. Those are my favorite boxes, by the way, the gray ones.
The gray one. That's really what those boxes are. But what's interesting, I find, is once you leave the community that you thought is black and white, you see the grays more. So like the more distance I get from the community, the more grays I see there, the more grays I see everywhere. And then you're like, oh, people are making choices everywhere in the world that puts themselves into these little rules to like, everyone's making a choice where I'm fitting in. And my hope though, is like, with films like this and with the fact that we like, as people that are exploring that, or that are thinkers that are we're aware of the boxes, first step, we're aware of these boxes. And the more awareness we have, I think that we can show that nuance, and that's where the humanity lies. And I think Emily does that beautifully in this film, right? Is the nuance of what that is, what finding a voice. We all like struggle with our voice in wherever you are in different ways, right? And I think like I think the nuance, that's really what excited me. The fact that sorry, Luzer, go.
No, I was gonna let you finish. Yeah.
Okay, so that I love that this woman finally has a voice, even if it's not her. Like, what does that mean? What does that mean? It's the voice that's freeing from, it's from her. Because I remember the first time like I sang out loud, we were doing, actually Luzer was doing this too, it was an experimental theater project with Milena, who came in from France, and she did this with a group of us. And we were doing this like a summer workshop. And I remember the first time that I like had to, like, she's a singer as well. I remember the first time I had to like sing or find my voice. I remember how difficult that was and how closed I was. And I had to cry in order to like clear my voice. And there was a similar thing with like, because what was fun is you don't hear it in the film because it's overcut with Gera's voice. Not Gera's voice, with David's voice, David Mandelbaum, who plays the rabbi who died, is that I actually got to use my voice in a different way. So I got to sing. I got to, like before the Amid, I got to, daven. And that experience for me is still something that like I remember so viscerally, because it was this release, and I knew it's not me. It wasn't like Melissa doing this. It was Melissa in this character who had the rabbi in her, like all of this. And it was such a release to like find that. So like, I love that. I love how this film played with that and what that meant. And also for those men listening to that, they all had to grapple with that too. What does this mean? It's a woman, it's a child. Like it made them grapple. I love that. That's when you notice you're in a box. What do I do? And to me, that's the funnest part. So people watching that will go with the same thing. Like, oh, what do you do? That's a shaila. That's like a question that again, you grapple with. It's a very Jewy thing. It's a very Talmudic thing. So I love that. I love how it turns that on its head. That was for me like the funnest, most exciting thing.
And I just want to say we're closing in on an hour and maybe a little bit more. So I definitely want to let you guys go back. This is such a fascinating conversation. I feel like we could have this all night and it would be still fascinating in an hour or 2 hours, but I want to make sure to adhere to your time and, you know, our audience and so forth. But I think it's such a beautiful way to put it. My personal experience is exactly like yours, that it's a matter of once you open your eyes, you see that everybody is living in various shades.
Yeah,
Some definitely more on the black scale than others, the black and white scale, and others a little more on the gray scale, like your printer. But ultimately, everyone's making choices all the time. And once we recognize that, and the even in the minutest situations, that is really where humanity lies. And finding your voice, Melissa, that was just so beautiful to hear. So lovely, because that's what we all need to do. Ultimately, whatever we're doing, we need to find our voice. Luzer, you wanted to say something.
Understanding breeds tolerance. That's what it is. Understanding breeds tolerance. And one of the best ways to get people to understand you or to understand anyone is to tell them a good story. That's why I think storytelling is the most powerful tool that we have, and like politically and you know, in everything, and I think that's what we're trying to do. And you get people understand you, they tolerate you better. And
that's right. They see your humanity, which means that they become real for you, that you're another person. They may live completely differently and they may have completely different perspectives, but I can relate to you as a fellow human on this journey, just like hopefully you can relate to me. And that,
and that's why movies and TV shows are important. At least that's what I mean. Is it as important as a COVID vaccine? No.
That's why representation is important.
Alibi next, that should come. And actually, that's exactly. I'm sorry, Emily?
Storytelling is important for humanity. It's how we pass on knowledge. It's how we understand each other. It's how we learn to love each other. It's also how we learn to hate each other if we, tell the wrong stories. So, there's tremendous.
Well put.
For sure.
And maybe one day.
As well as that's what, and then on that note that's where the representation is so important, right? So you see these people and you just see the humanity. So you see storytelling is important and how we can change those perceptions, like Luzer was saying, is showing the humanity. And it's all nuanced, it's all nuanced. It's all hard, it's all difficult. Like life is not black and white. And that's where the beauty lies and the complexity and it's difficult. But yes, I think storytelling,
That is right. And that is exactly why the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education, SAGE, is the sponsor of the Miami Jewish Film Festival, because it's such a great way of educating in a very different, distinct way from classroom settings and even experiential programs. Film is a medium that really touches your heart and your soul differently because of the nature of excellent storytelling, just like this movie, Holy Woman or Tzedekis. And so with this, I want to tell everyone, thank you so much for having watched this movie, for having listened to our wonderful talk together with actress Melissa Weisz and actor Luzer Twersky and director Emily Cheeger for this incredible film. And thank you so much for being part of our 24th annual Miami Jewish Film Festival. Keep watching.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.